Welcome to part two of this six-part workshop on resilience from carers in Hertfordshire. In this video, we're going to be discussing emotional coping. When we're considering our own resilience, it can be helpful to visualise ourselves and everyone around us as having a stress bucket. Stress buckets come in all different shapes and sizes. Everyone has one, and they are simply the means we have of carrying our stresses around with us all day, every day. Hopefully, for most of us, most of the time, our stress buckets are manageable. They're light enough for us to carry around. The stresses that we might be carrying around with us could be things like family quarrels, anxiety, debt, health of the person or the people that we care for, all sorts of things like that. The more stress we experience, the fuller our bucket gets, and it can feel heavier depending on how we feel on the day, even if our stresses haven't changed. To stop stress building up and our bucket overflowing, it's important to find activities that lighten the load. And we can imagine these as holes in the bucket. So, our holes in the bucket are things that we enjoy doing. It's not about removing the causes of stress, it's about finding ways to manage the emotional impact so stress doesn't build up and overwhelm us. Ways that we can relieve stress and puncture our stress bucket could be things like speaking to a friend, exercise, sleep, singing, whatever you have found that helps relieve stress for you. It's worth mentioning that comparisons are unhelpful. As I said at the start, everyone's stress buckets are different sizes and shapes. Some people seem to be able to carry around an immense amount of stress without actually being overwhelmed by it, and other people seem to go to pieces over the slightest thing. Stress buckets are personal to the individuals they belong to. It is only going to make things worse if we start comparing ourselves to others, much as we're tempted. So focus on our own stress buckets and how we can manage them in our day-to-day lives. We can also visualize ourselves as being at some point on the exhaustion funnel. Now, if we can imagine a funnel, it's broader at the top and narrower at the bottom. And at the top, where our lives are broad, we have lots of interests and activities. We're leading a balanced life. We're generally content and looking after our own needs. But sometimes in our lives, the very important things overtake us. And that's fine for a time to give up on optional things to focus on what seems important. Sometimes the things are very, very important. Particularly in caring, we might be responsible for someone's quality of life to a very large extent, and that is certainly a very important thing. That is not going to go away. So we might feel like we're part way down the funnel, but it's important to just remember that these optional things we give up on, such as hobbies, maybe we lose touch with friends for a bit while we deal with the very major things that are going on in our life. These optional things are often those which help us deal with stress. If we don't care for our own needs for a long period of time, then we do risk burnout. And it is important to reintroduce these optional things before we reach the bottom of the funnel. The more we give up, the harder it is to climb back up the funnel and return to some degree of normality. And at the bottom of the funnel, we risk burnout, we risk depression, anxiety, all sorts of things. And we have nothing left to help us cope with the stresses in our lives. It's a lot more difficult to deal with. Even if we are caring for someone and that caring role is vitally important, I'd suggest that it is worth looking at having some level of balance, if possible, simply because if we burn out, then the person that we're caring for may not be able to count on us while we're experiencing our own difficulties. So, just worth thinking about where we are on that exhaustion funnel and putting in some simple steps, some kind of catches, uh, those optional things that help us deal with stress before we reach the bottom of the funnel. Breaking the stress cycle is an exercise from the Caring with Confidence course that you may have done before. It is quite helpful when we're considering our own resilience, which is why we've put it in this workshop. So, if we have a look at the diagram, we start with number 1 on the right that happens outside ourselves. Outside stresses occur to us and they affect what happens inside our bodies. So at number 1, we have events, situations, relationships that occur outside ourselves. But we then move to number 2, 3, and 4. These events, situations, and relationships affect our thoughts, our feelings, and our physical response. So this can be a positive thing, or in a stressful event, a negative thing. And all these internal processes affect number 5, our behavior, which is what we present. So in a stressful situation, our behavior can result in us behaving erratically, making mistakes, shouting and becoming aggressive, crying. And that in turn feeds back into our internal thoughts, feelings, and physical response. We see how we're behaving and we might not like it, and it just turns into a vicious circle. To break the stress cycle, we need to find one point at least where we can just stop this roundabout effect. On the inside, we could practice thinking about the issue in a different way. It's really not easy to change the way that we think about something. Practices like mindfulness can help us isolate and affect our thoughts. It does take about 100 times to actually build a habit. So it's not going to be easy, but we can start by being aware of our thoughts and trying to think in a slightly different way. Maybe seeing, as I mentioned at the very start, the introduction to this workshop, seeing failure as a form of helpful feedback, or at least trying to. We could also do something that makes us feel good, so change our feelings. That can be simply stepping outside a stressful situation and spending a little time breathing or singing a song or doing something brief that makes you feel good. We can also help our body relax and feel better. So if we notice that our shoulders are tensing up, just giving them a quick rub. Exercise, going for a quick walk if we can, walk, even if it's just around the garden. If we have a punch bag or something, going and taking our anger out on that. We can also tackle the outside cause if possible. Are we so focused on achieving a particular thing that we haven't stopped to question whether this needs to be done now? Are we placing ourselves under undue stress unnecessarily? We can also learn to manage our behaviour differently so that our behaviour doesn't feed back into that cycle of negative thoughts and feelings. So if we practice assertiveness skills, we can, instead of shouting or crying, we can feel like we're presenting an argument in a calm manner, and that then stops the vicious circle from continuing. The important thing is to find one point in this cycle where we think we might be able to make a difference and break that cycle. So not removing the stress. Resilience is about how we deal with the stress and making sure that it doesn't build up. Mindfulness is a technique that can be very helpful in building resilience. It's about existing in the present moment and not worrying about what may happen in the future or what has happened in the past, which sounds very unrealistic, but it does become easier with practice. There are lots of free, simple techniques to help you learn how to be more mindful. If you just do a quick online search, there will be so much stuff available on mindfulness. It's not easy, but it's about really seeing your thoughts, recognizing that you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings. They are just things that come into your mind and they will pass. Mindfulness, Finding Peace in a Frantic World by Williams and Penman is a good introduction to the topic if you are interested and are not really an online person. It's a book with audio files or a CD and introduces mindfulness in a simple, easy to understand way. It's a good way into the topic. The compassionate mind approach is another way of being aware of our feelings. It's about noticing when we're being overly critical of ourselves, when we're being really hard on ourselves and beating ourselves up over something. And that's often about our response to a particular event or situation. In the compassionate mind approach, we learn how to be compassionate when we are overthinking negative thoughts. We are kind to ourselves and we don't let ourselves off the hook, but we just treat ourselves as we would treat our friends. You can find out more about the compassionate mind approach by following the link underneath the video. Ensuring you have a break is a very important way of managing to cope with emotions. And it is very easy to sit there and say, oh, but I just don't have time to have a break. That would be amazing, but I just can't do it. It doesn't have to mean going away for 2 weeks and relaxing in a hotel or taking up a time intensive hobby. It can be simply 5 minutes away from life, from a person, away from your caring role in a different room, or with the person that you're caring for, with someone that you like being with, and doing something you enjoy. So, do a row of knitting, play a game of chess with yourself, get the binoculars out and see how many birds you can find in 5 minutes. Just something that you personally enjoy that is all that you focus on for 5 minutes. To help you, there is a Make a Difference service from carers in Hertfordshire, which is a grant available to all carers. It's not means tested, and it will help you get a break from caring. It can be used on all sorts of things, from equipment that you need to take up a new hobby to gym memberships, garden furniture, a tumble dryer, whatever is going to make a difference to you. So visit our website or give us a call for more information. It's open to all carers once. So if you haven't had a Make a Difference grant, then that's definitely something that is available to you and I'd suggest you look into. I've suggested a few different approaches, a few different ways of thinking about emotional coping over this particular video. But we all do things already to cope with challenging emotions. I might have mentioned some of them. You might have your own ways of dealing with it. It's worth taking a few minutes just to make a mental or just a physical list to consider what you already do to cope with challenging emotions. What do you go to in times of stress? Once you've established what you do, what could you try? I've mentioned a range of different things. Why not choose one of the approaches or one of the topics from this video and follow the links below to find out a bit more about it. There's a little video explaining the stress bucket in more detail. There's a link to more information on mindfulness, the compassionate mind approach. Are you just going to find out more about our Make a Difference scheme? Whatever you've got time for, whatever you think might be useful to you, now is the time to investigate it a little bit further. And that's the end of part 2 in our workshop on resilience. Next up, we are moving on to practical coping, and I hope I'll see you there.